Well, there's been glad handing on a stratospheric level this week as Gordon Brown welcomed the leaders of the G20 nations to London. Their task? To rebuild capitalism and fix the shattered global economy. No pressure there then. But if nothing else, this financial disaster and the attempts to fix it have shown that economics is perhaps much less a science than an art, and perhaps an art about which even the self-professed experts know much less than they think. Here, for example, is a quote from a core economics textbook for undergraduates, a book published as recently as 2008. Modern banking has systems of insurance that make widespread bank failures less likely. Also, economists know much more today than they did in the 1930s. It goes on, our knowledge of how the economy works should help guide policymakers in avoiding repeating past mistakes. Well, Dr. Andrew Baker is from Queen's University, and we're joined also by the economist John Simpson. Dr. Baker, if that's what young undergraduates are learning about the economy, there is surely no hope for any of us.
Indeed. Actually, one of the things to come out of this G20 summit turns that conventional wisdom on its head, that banks can't be allowed to price their own risk individually. So that bottom-up approach, one thing to come out of the last 3 or 4 months is a sea change, an important sea change, and now we're going to have this top-down approach that has this technical jargon associated with it, macroprudential regulation, a series of rules, regulations and requirements on a macro level that banks and financial institutions are going to have to comply with. So that statement is being turned on its head.
But meanwhile, it's being taught to undergraduates for the last 30 years, and even undergraduates who are at university now, that's what they're being taught. So in classrooms and lecture rooms around the country, are economics teachers and lecturers just saying, I'm sorry guys, what we thought we knew, we just got it completely wrong?
Well, I would have two hopes for the economics profession that might emerge from this crisis. The first is that I think there are a number of Keynesian economists in the US and the United Kingdom who would say that they've almost enjoyed pariah status over the last 30 years. They've been marginalised, they've been pushed to the periphery of the profession. So my hope would be that the economics profession will become less homogenous, that there will be a wider range of voices represented, and this will filter through into teaching. My second big hope is that economics as a discipline will begin to reach out to other disciplines such as psychology, philosophy and politics. And indeed at Queen's what we're doing, we're making a tiny step in this direction. We're launching a new programme from September, which is our BA programme in politics, philosophy and economics. And we have big hopes for it. We're excited by it and we're hugely optimistic.
John Simpson, many of the politicians who've run this country for generations did that PPE Oxford degree, so that's not much of a sign of hope, is it?
I think you're pinning too much onto what that text in the States, which was written, within the last 2 years. I'm sure I could equally produce textbooks which said something different. Now, it's all right. Even the Queen said to someone at the stage when this crisis was baking, did anybody not see it coming? And the short answer was, certainly it wasn't foretold in strong language. But I think when we look back on it, there was a reason for that. We've lived through 50 years, would it be, when there hasn't been a reversal of the kind we've now seen. And the banks were being left on trust. The main lesson we've learned is you can't trust the banks to behave responsibly in total.
All right, but that was an economic theory, wasn't it? Because, as Andrew says, Keynesianism preached that there should be some policy intervention to control what banks and private finance institutions were doing.
Keynesianism was more controlling the state of the fiscal stimulus rather than in terms of money. I mean, Keynes dismissed
qualitative easing.
Some of the monetary arguments Keynes put slightly to one side. But nevertheless, we're on the same field to play the game now. And the short answer is this game does need to have a new set of rules. They need to be enforced. And the lessons of today in London are that we need to make sure those rules are enforced and are clear.
But who's going to design the rules if no one knows what they should do, what these rules should actually achieve?
Well, you take something like a summit process. The best way to think of that is a kind of punctuation mark in an ongoing process. So what it does really, it sets deadlines, it catalyses activity, it makes people sit down and put together the work. We've got to have a certain level of agreement to put it in the communique. So this process has been ongoing. Remember the Washington summit in November, but a variety of specialist technical committees have been meeting since then, and it's through those kinds of deliberations that we've really seen this sea change over the last 3 or 4 months, and it really is only over the last 3 or 4 months.
Yes,
and at the cutting edge of it is Adair Turner's report at the Financial Services Authority, when he's flagging up this whole macro-prudential regulation agenda. There's been a big conversion to this in the UK.
What Andrew's saying is that really, by focusing today on the G20, we're actually losing sight of the fact that the real thinking work has been going on in different places in a way in which doesn't get newspaper headlines. Today gets the newspaper headlines, but it really, in effect, is the conclusions of a lot of work. There were a lot of those prime ministers who went to the meeting today knowing the paper they were going to sign at the end of the day, because the Sherpas, as they say, have been negotiating it for days.
But you also have differences of opinion even at this point. You have Sarkozy and Merkel saying they want the red line, they want less intervention, and the rest of them saying we want more intervention.
That can be reconciled.
I'm getting a bit confused there, actually.
All right, go on. Explain.
OK. The fiscal stimulus side of things, well, the idea that you have a coordinated international fiscal stimulus from one of these summits is a bit of a nonsense, a bit of a political red herring. The last time it happened was in 1978 at the Bonn Summit, led to inflation in Germany. Countries do their own thing on that kind of thing. The big difference, in a sense, has been on how far you push this macro-prudential regulation. So Sarkozy's wanted things on tax havens in the communiqué. He's wanted direct regulation of hedge funds into the communiqué. And, of course, the threat to walk out is partly political grandstanding to a domestic political audience back home.
What's going on today at the G20 is of tremendous significance as to what the future might be for shorts, because the whole financial system and the way in which the world economy begins to recover, on the assumption it does recover, actually, we are interested in it. So we are interested in the outcome and making sure that it's implemented effectively. And there are all sorts of issues there, and the academics amongst us will probably spend days looking at small print. But the politicians will actually say, have we done enough to ensure that the bottom of this recession comes sooner?
One of the points being made today is the 3 companies which have announced job losses in Northern Ireland this week are American companies, effectively. So are we now catching the cold from America's sneeze?
No, we're catching the cold that is worldwide. But the important thing about what the companies have done this week, with the exception of Visteon, which I think is slightly different because we've seen that coming for some time, the important thing is that those companies are keeping going. They're not closing. And it's important, therefore, that in terms of the regional economy, that we do what we can to sustain those companies and prepare them for a year's time, 2 years' time.
Dr. Berger, can we be confident that there are enough economists who have a handle on what is actually going to happen, or is it possible that no one really knows where we're going to be in 12 months' time?
Well, going back to the second part of that quotation that you started off this piece with, I maintain that this crisis is really a crisis of excessive complexity. If we look at some of the financial instruments that have been built up, quite simply, too few people understood what was going on, and the extent of the damage is still emerging and will continue to emerge for some time. So anybody who sits down and tells you and looks you in the eye and say, this is where we'll be in 12 months, I don't think it's been entirely truthful.
No.
OK, do you agree with that briefly, John?
It's not going to be that accurate, but nevertheless, we actually have to influence to make sure that the change does come.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Confused? You might be.